Hello writers, come write with me. My name is Mykela Greenwood. I create worlds for mind adventures. Welcome to my channel, Write with Mykela. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell so you can go on this journey with me. Today we're going to discuss a term, and then we're going to add to your story that started with a setting. All writings shared on the channel are copyright protected. So when you are finished writing, don't forget to send your writings to writewithmykela@gmail.com. Now, our term today is convoluted. If something is convoluted, especially an argument, story, or sentence, it means it is extremely complex or complicated and difficult to follow or difficult to understand. Some synonyms are intricate, labyrinthine, perplexing, puzzling, tangled, tortuous, baffling, confused, elaborate, involved, complex, impenetrable, and serpentine. Some antonyms are direct, simple, straight, straightforward, understandable, clear, and uncomplicated. As writers, we don't want our stories to seem convoluted, but for characters within the story, that would be fine. The convoluted scene might be a mystery scene, or something for a detective to solve. Or maybe it is a rare and mysterious disease where the symptoms are hard for the doctor to follow. I'm talking maybe an unexplained stomach ache one day and a headache the next, where there's always pain, but never in the same place and never explainable. Or whatever to make a disease. I'm not really into that medical stuff, so you have to decide that. Let's go back to mystery. How much more convoluted would a murder scene be if there was a setup, and someone planted false information or false evidence? Now, there is actually a genre of mystery, and I'm sure some of you are great at writing mysteries. And you don't want your readers to solve all the clues right away. But in the end of the story, the mystery is usually solved. There's a conclusion there. And I personally think mysteries would be hard to write because you have to know the end, not write like you know the end kind of thing. So I think it's hard, and my hat is off to those of you who do write mystery. My grandmother used to love to read those, so I do have an affinity for those. For the rest of us, where could we use this? Think of someone like a teen that wanted to get away with something. If they could complicate things to where their parents didn't understand, they would get away with whatever they were attempting, or at least that's going to be their hope. The same is true for any character in your stories. When a character wants to do something that perhaps he or she shouldn't be doing, and I'm talking about, according to the law, maybe the good guys have to do something that they maybe shouldn't do to get things done. So that is kind of a different perspective too. Also, you have to take that into consideration. But you have a character that wants to do something that perhaps he or she shouldn't be doing. They can make things seem complicated by convoluting the circumstances. In these instances, the reader knows full well what is going on, and it can make some comic effects. Then, of course, you have to know if the other character will be gullible enough for the convoluted scheme to work. Think about all the movies you've watched and where someone wanted to get past security guard or past the police, and a second person went to the guard or the police, and they asked help as the first person slipped past. I actually use this idea in my science fiction series called Operatives. But the character actually goes all the way inside and takes the keys of the security guard and then runs out, and the security guard follows after her. And two other characters are like at the door, against the wall. And when the security guard runs out, the two other characters head into the building. Now, most times we as humans don't want things to be complicated in our own lives. We want everything to be understood. We don't want somebody pulling the wool over our eyes or whatever. But that doesn't mean our characters need to make everything clear and straightforward. Okay, now let's turn to our story that we started with a setting this season 3.1, episode 17. And then we continued it with episode 31. So this is part 3. We started with a full moon and some fog and mist. And I left it wide open from there. I don't know if your character made it to his or her destination, or if your character got lost. I don't know if you started one thing and then started over. I don't know if your character enjoyed running in the misty rain, or if he or she was stuck like my character. Your instructions were simply to continue. If your character made it out and home, then what was next? If your character was lost, what was next? So those are basically your same instructions. We're just going to keep continuing. So the more important instruction, I guess, is to have fun. Just look into it, see what has happened so far in your story, see where you want to go from here, and have fun. Pause the video and come back, and I'll read what I added to this story. Okay, welcome back, writers. Let me read what I wrote. Kahira rode in the ambulance, and they checked her out. They did notice that she had hit her head and had a concussion, and once they got back to the hospital, they ran some scans. After they finished, they asked Kahira whom she wanted them to call to pick her up, and Kahira decided to call her sister. Half an hour later, she was in her sister's car, and they were heading to the sister's home, because the hospital didn't think Kahira should be alone yet, even though the scans came out fine. At first, the car ride home was in silence, and Kahira tried processing what had happened. About halfway home, her sister Kalista asked, "Do you want to talk about what happened?" Kahira glanced over. "I'm not sure what happened. I thought George and I were driving to the hill country, like we do once a month or so. We were going to Monty's cabin. We've driven the road hundreds of times, but..." Kahira stopped. She needed to know what was real and what was not. "But the car veered off the road and I got a concussion. So probably my memory is off. Is George at home?" Kahira could not believe herself. Why would she ask that? But she knew. There was nobody. So she had to find George first, or find out where people thought he was. "We can drive by there. But you told me on the phone 3 days ago that you were going to the cabin," stated Kalista. "You should have left yesterday. Both you and George were leaving yesterday." Kahira shook her head. "I don't know what to think." "You never made it to the cabin," stated Kalista. "We were driving there," replied Kahira. "No. Before the hospital asked me to pick you up, the cops called. Your car was not on Highway 87. It was on FM 113. That's not the way to the cabin. I've been to the cabin maybe as many times as you have." Kahira turned and looked at her sister. She sighed. I'm not good with direction. Especially when you're crocheting or something, put in her sister. Don't worry, we'll figure it out. They drove the rest of the way to Kahira's house in silence. The two got out and went through every room in the house, and then Kahira packed a spare bag. They got in the car, and Callista drove them to her house. Once they arrived at Callista's house, they began calling all George's friends to see if anyone knew where he was, and no one had seen him. After Callista's husband went upstairs and went to bed, Callista asked Kahira to tell her what she thought had happened. And Kahira told the story of George collapsing and swerving off the road. She told of trying the CPR on him and then walking down the road to the next gas station, but never finding it. She skipped the wolves in the cave and told of walking back to the car and then back to the first station. When she told of the police driving her back to the car and there being no body, Kahira just started crying and crying. She asked, "Where's George? Where could he be? No one would just take a body out of a car. Did I leave George behind? Why would I do that? We don't fight." Kahira looked up to get her tears to recede back in her eyes. Her sister grabbed a box of tissues and sat beside her on the couch. She rubbed her back. Kahira collapsed on her sister's shoulder and just cried. She felt lost and confused and didn't know what to do. Callista was worried about her sister, and she thought she would call Monty in the morning to see if anyone picked up the cabin keys from Miss Holster, the neighbor. In the early morning, Callista made the call, and soon Monty called back, reporting that no one had picked up the keys from Miss Holter. So that left the question of where George was. They ate breakfast, and Callista's husband left for work, and then the police arrived and gave their report. The only blood they found in the car was Kahira's blood, but Kahira needed to call her insurance and report the wreck. They suggested she blamed the wreck on the fog. Once they left, Kahira looked at Callista. Callista shrugged her shoulders. "Say George was driving. He may turn up somewhere." She held up her hands. "I know you said he was dead, but I don't know." Kahira called the insurance and reported the wreck. Then about mid-morning, someone pulled up in the driveway in Kahira's car. Callista looked out of the curtain. "Hey, Kahira, come here and tell me if this is your car." Kahira looked out the window as George was getting out of the car. "George!" she called, and she ran out of the house to greet her husband. Callista followed her out. Kahira embraced George. "Oh, I thought you were dead. I tried CPR on you." I was knocked out," replied George. "You must have saved me. But when I awoke, I couldn't find you. I searched in the woods, but then when I returned to the car was gone." Kahira took his hands in hers. "Oh, you are so cold. Why don't you come inside?" "Dear, I've had a long night, and I want to go home and rest," replied George. "We will come back and visit your sister soon." Kahira turned to Callista and hugged her. "Thanks for everything," she said. And then she told George she needed to get her things. An uneasy silence filled the air while Callista and George waited for Kahira to return. To Callista, something seemed strange. Certainly, his story was strange. Why would he search for Kahira in the woods? Kahira would stick to the road. And the other strange thing was, how did he get back? Surely he didn't walk all that way. Soon Kahira was back. She climbed in the car with George, and he drove them home. Once home, George went upstairs to bed, and Kahira grabbed a book to read on the back porch. She brought out some hot tea and a couple of cookies and sat down to read. Then beyond their short fence, she saw a few wolves. and they were watching her. Kira didn't know what to think, but it was very hard to read her book. Her mind kept asking questions, and she couldn't concentrate on the story in the book at all. Okay, writers, that is the end of the scene for today. I'm sure you have lots of questions. Instead of me stating questions, I will again let you leave them in the comments. I would love to read your questions. Of course, you may have had some questions from the first or second one that I haven't answered yet, or maybe I have. You just don't. I don't know what your questions are. Leave them in the comments. And if they're from the first scene or the second scene, it doesn't matter. Just leave your questions, and we'll see where the story goes to see if your questions are answered or something opens up. Join me Friday for Eleni's Pride Breaking Point Chapter 20. More linkers. Join me Tuesday for Talk About Jargon. I'm going to talk about compare and contrast. Also, I'm going to talk about comparative and superlative. It will be fun. Don't forget to visit my website, bymykela.com, and read some character bios. And send your writings and chapters to writewithmykela@gmail.com. Leave comments on your favorite characters. And it doesn't have to be just the website. It could be the characters from City of the Ancients. It could be characters from Tahia. It could be characters from Eleni's Pride. If you hit like and subscribe and the bell, then we will continue to write together. And other people will have a higher chance of finding this video and this channel, and we will build our community together. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate your participation. If you know someone who would like this video, then please share it with them. This is Mykela with Write with Mykela. Bye for now.